welcome to Money Matters TV in our series, The Business of Translational Science, where we explore the business of bringing scientific discoveries to the clinic and ultimately improving patient care. We're focusing on the earliest part of starting a company, at the intersection of R&D and product development. The inventors, founders, and investors at this point in a company's life cycle are at the outer edge of the risk spectrum. We look forward to exploring the journey from idea to product market fit and a scalable commercial success with you. I'm your host, Mike Verrill, owner of VPE Advisors. We are value building strategists and M&A consultants to private businesses and their owners. Entrepreneurs focus on driving growth and maximizing value for their partners while partnering with VPE to prepare for and execute on a capital raise or sale of their business. From time to time, financial issues relating to life sciences, healthcare, technology matters or companies may be discussed on this show. These discussions are not and should not be viewed as financial advice. Moreover, since the program is pre-recorded and shown at a later date, some of that information may no longer be current. You should always check with your financial advisor before entering into any financial transaction. I'm looking forward to hearing from our guest today, a 25-plus year veteran of Wall Street and the life sciences industry. But before we introduce him, we have a question from one of our viewers. Martin Rogers from Philadelphia would like to know, how do you see AI helping the medical field? Thanks for the question, Martin. This is certainly an exciting time, and we're only at the beginning of what AI can do to help improve medical outcomes. If there's one thing we're not short of in healthcare, it's data. In molecular science, across patient populations, and within the hospital itself, there exists an infinite amount of information. AI allows us to process that data so much faster than humans and identify relational information to improve the way we approach just about everything in healthcare. So it's going to be widespread, Martin. And like I said, very exciting, but we are in the very early stages. So a lot is yet to come. Hopefully that was helpful, and here's how to submit questions for a future episode.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says, Send us your questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, M-O-N-E-Y, -matters, M-A-T-T-E-R-S, TV.com.
As I mentioned, our guest today has a long career on both Wall Street and in the life sciences industry. I look forward to hearing the story of how these two passions intersected to provide him the platform to launch a successful career in investments and leading multiple life sciences companies. It's my pleasure to introduce Patrick Gallagher, managing partner of Lucius Partners and CEO of Voltron Therapeutics, to the business of translational science.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Great. It's really great to see you again, Patrick. Your opportunity to combine life sciences with your investment background was somewhat serendipitous. Can you give us your background and tell us a little bit about how this came to be?
Yeah, sure. So I came out of business school and I had just been taught that the efficient market was a thing, and ended up noticing that many chemical companies globally in the early to mid 90s had life sciences assets, and nobody knew how to value them. They were all covered by chemical analysts on the buy side, at hedge funds and mutual funds, and they were covered by chemical analysts at the big sell side firms, Goldman, Deutsche Bank, what have you. And so the firm I was at set about trying to figure out what those assets were worth and did a really good job of it. And shortly thereafter, the mergers started. So Ciba Geigy and Sandoz created Novartis, and Herbst and Rhone-Poulenc created Aventis. Dow and DuPont had healthcare assets. So it was a really very interesting time in terms of consolidation. And that's really where I got my feet wet in the healthcare business. Shortly thereafter, of course, biologics started to become more important. Genzyme and Genentech, Biogen. These were all little tiny companies in Cambridge at the time. So it was just really a lot of right place at the right time. But I was fortunate to have some people around who were creative and thoughtful and willing to put in the work, understanding what these assets were, that nobody had really spent time on.
Yeah, so quite a few different trends, right? From the big mega deals to
Yeah.
now, like you said, the smaller biotechs in the industry, as those, you run out of big mega deals, right? You can only do
Yes.
so many.
It took a
And
while, but yeah, we did.
yeah,
Yeah.
and now, there's still some big blockbuster deals going on, but mostly you see a lot of biotech. Tell us about kind of how the pharmaceutical industry has changed and how pharma manufacturers have changed to kind of drive that trend. And is it that they're I mean, what I've seen is a reduction in R&D expense and not taking the risk. And is that what you're seeing? And is that kind of what's driving the current market and the environment?
Yeah, I would say, to be fair to industry, they do have considerable internal capabilities on the R&D side, as you would expect. They are certainly more receptive to making acquisitions, and they know that a lot of the innovation does go on at smaller companies. It's hard, for example, for larger companies in general to get involved with core academic bench research, right? It's a different culture, it's a different type of endeavor. So there's a lot of room for small companies to be innovative and become very important within the context of big pharma or big biotech's portfolios. Again, they do have really smart and talented people inside assessing these sorts of technologies all the time, but the actual work that gets done internally, I think it's fair to say that some of that is being outsourced to smaller companies.
Great. Yeah, it makes sense. There's only so much money, they can invest in the R&D internally. Um, is that changing the kind of the way that academia looks at the basic research that they do? Do you see more um, research and educational institutions focusing on a commercial pathway for the research that they're doing?
I think that looks good on paper. In reality, it's hard to execute on. I mean, we all have our strengths and our muscle memory. We've been very fortunate in the teams that we've worked with at a couple of big institutions, with some of our portfolio companies, where the collaborators, when we found technologies that we wanted to bring in from, for example, from Mass General, we've kept the scientific innovators engaged as consultants. I think that there's a lot to be said for keeping the folks that brought the idea to you involved. They'll have a lot of different insights on the science and where else it could be applicable. But to translate that into an IND with the FDA and the manufacturing work, the pre-regulatory work, I mean, that's really not what the academic institutions are set up for. But I think they understand that, and they do value the interaction with public-private collaboration. The bench research that is going on is continuing to improve for lots of obvious reasons. The cost of technology to pressure test hypotheses is dropping, and there's more focus at the government level in funding innovative programs, and of course, academia lives on grants. So I do think that academia has always had a place, of course, but it is gaining in importance in my view.
Just to continue to fill the pipeline and develop good research.
Yeah, I think that's right. And thinking about new mechanisms of action, right? And that's a lot of time in the trenches with petri dishes and mice and animal labs and testing hypotheses. So it's real important work. There's not a lot of private enterprises that are set up to do that, right? That's
Mhm.
really, academic centers are geared toward that sort of research.
You mentioned that with Voltron, you partnered with Mass General. Can you talk to us about how that came about? Was it, which came first, I guess? Was it the conversations with Mass General and the technology that developed at Harvard, and then, hey, let's form Voltron and trying to further develop that? Or was Voltron first and you were looking for a particular technology to try to then commercialize?
A great question. So actually, it came about through a relationship that we had with Dr. Mark Poznansky, who runs the Vaccine and Immunotherapy Center. And so we had a relationship with Mark, and he brought this platform technology to our attention. And then the entity was set up to catch, as it were, catch the platform technology after we'd done some due diligence and figured out that we thought it would have broad application across oncology and infectious disease potentially. So we spent a lot of time on the due diligence first, then set up the entity to license the rights to the platform from the mothership.
And how important is that when you think about licensing technology from a research institute or academia? Like, what are some of the characteristics you look for when you're partnering with them to help ensure the success going forward?
Well, you want to make sure that you have the global rights to whatever it is you're licensing. In this case, it was some core patents around the delivery technology of the therapy. So you want to make sure that you have those rights. You also want to understand the process to continue to do work with the institution. For example, we feel it's very important to continue to work with Mass General. They have unique capabilities inside of the entity. Infrastructure is set up to do animal studies, to do a variety of other research experiments and validation type work. And so we felt that not only did we want to license this from them, we wanted to make sure it was okay to keep the team on as consultants to help guide us along the way, and to do additional research and to have access to the facilities that a place like a Mass General would have. So that might not be for everybody, but we felt it was very important to do that as an entity. And, with homegrown technologies like that, as a small company, as you move into the clinical setting, into humans, it's really hard to get the attention of a big academic center to do your trials. Trials can be a pain in the neck. It's paperwork for the staff, for the nurses, for the doctors. And if it's a homegrown technology, you're more likely to be able to stay in-house, which is a huge advantage. Again, each institution's different, and I don't want to speak for Mass General, but
Right.
like generally, I think that those were the things that were important to us as an entity.
How about the licensing agreement itself? I've heard, pushback on some that, academia, it's just hard to get to an agreement from a licensing standpoint on, how the ownership will be structured, how to share in the potential success of that. Do you experience that? Obviously, Matt is a good partner for you. Come across situations where the academic setting has just made it difficult from a licensing standpoint?
Every institution's different, and each has their line in the sand. You just have to learn to negotiate them. They're not set up like a business is per se, private enterprise to get these things done. But my experience has been where there's a will, there's a way.
Mhm.
There's a path forward. In all these contracts, there's 2 pages of stuff that matters, and the other 45 are, silliness. So my
Full
advice
employment for
is
the
to get
attorney.
to, yeah, my advice is to get to the 2 pages early and work through the language there, and the rest will fall into place. But,
Mhm.
again, each entity is different, and, people change in the roles, right? So there's new people that come on board, and everybody approaches it a little differently. But my experience has been, by and large, pretty positive. I mean, people are responsible and want to want to make sure that these technologies see the light of day and actually get into humans. So.
Yeah, that's great. So partnership's important, obviously, your Mass General and Harvard partnership, but and once you kind of get that all ironed out and you agree to kind of continue to work forward, and you've got the scientific experts coming on as consultants to make sure you're kind of following that scientific path that they had imagined, then you're building out the team. Can you talk about that? Like, what's that like? Who are the key components? Talk to me about what it takes to, because the whole idea is to create the infrastructure around the technology,
Mhm.
the idea to continue to push it down that commercial pathway.
Yeah, this is a really critical question. And so if I could just back up for a moment, uh, over time, sitting in the Wall Street seat, I met with, had thousands of meetings with companies, and companies succeed for all sorts of reasons, but they tend to run into trouble for only a few. And so that's what I tend to focus on. And fortunately, I found some like-minded people to do the same thing. Again, this is not necessarily appropriate for everybody, but I really focus on the risks of what can go wrong. Obviously, the science in any situation can go wrong, and you do your best to make sure you're validating it along the way. Management oftentimes will have blind spots, and recognizing the blind spots that you have internally is of course it's a challenge, but to be realistic about that is really important. But the other two that I found all that really created a lot of the problems that companies ran into were manufacturing and managing your contract research organizations, the people that you depend on to generate data, whether it's immunogenicity or efficacy or toxicity, whatever it is you're using outside sources for. The second you hand something off, the likelihood of mistakes goes up exponentially. It's out of your control. You're not watching the people every day. You don't know if there's a substitute because your lead person is sick that day. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong. So we hired a person with a lot of experience at a CRO to manage our CRO relationships, contract research organization. And we brought in a manufacturing person, even though we were preclinical.
Mhm.
And very few companies that I met with over time had either of those folks in a seat, even as an outside consultant. And I can tell you, and I can quantify that having those two people in house has saved us from errors. I don't know that they would have been existential, but have really reduced the risk. And as you talk to potential partners, whether it's the government for funding or a strategic to work with you in combination therapy, what have you, that kind of level of professionalism in-house makes a huge difference. So that's kind of how we go about building the team. Like, where are the blind spots in the industry? There's certainly blind spots for me, right?
Mhm.
So let's fill those first and build a team that will drive you towards objectivity, right? Like, everybody doesn't have to agree all the time, and these different skill sets tend to bring you to a more realistic answer. So the team that we built, I think having somebody who understands raising money
Right.
at a small company is critical because it's hard. You need to manage it. There's lots of follow up that's involved, all the obvious things. So you need somebody who understands raising money. You really, again, depending on the nature of the platform or the compound or the product, having somebody who really understands manufacturing is critical. And again, somebody who can manage an external vendors, particularly on the research, on the contract research side. Make sure that they're doing the paperwork right, things are starting on time, the science teams are okay with how the CRO is going to proceed. Those sorts of things are really, really critical. And if you're lucky enough to pull off, somebody who's had, real experience in the space you're in industry to be on your board, something like that, of course, is very, very helpful.
Mhm.
And I also think that part of it is with these various experiences and inputs and perspective that these different folks bring, you really are able to drive towards a lower risk um, proof of concept effort. And for investors and for your sanity, that's pretty important.
Right. Can you give us some examples? Because you have the science team working, and then the folks you're talking about, kind of from the business team and the commercial aspect. What's key to making sure those folks interact well? You mentioned good communication, and not understanding they don't always have to be right, or your answer doesn't have to win. But give us some examples of some things that you've seen kind of in working in that environment that have worked and haven't worked, and ways that the great science was maybe influenced in a positive way by the business folks and vice versa.
Yeah, it really takes a village. Everybody has had a lot to say along the way here. I'll give you an example. So with Voltron, the original target that we were assessing in cancer was ovarian. Ovarian's very challenging. The tumor has low mutational burden, so it's hard to target. And of course, that's an area where we want to have an impact. But we spent 3 months with external consultants, key opinion leaders in oncology, people that actually run clinical trials in oncology who know what's going on across the landscape, plus our internal team on the commercial side, scientific side, manufacturing side, and the team, Mark's team up at Mass General. So, 20 people on the phone saying, well, is this the smartest thing to do, or should we walk before we run? And so collectively, the team went through and looked at 20 different cancers, and cancers that had overexpression of certain peptides or proteins on the surface. Were they unmet medical needs? Were the animal models well characterized? Could you get cell lines commercially? All the sorts of things that a Novartis might do. Well, maybe not everything Novartis might do, but a real disciplined approach to what is the best path forward where we can test our platform, learn a lot from it, and hopefully show efficacy, and in a lower risk fashion, right? So like there's a whole bunch of stuff that went into that. It took 3 months. And so it wasn't back and forth like we think this is the answer or that's the answer. It was a collective negotiation, including with the scientific founders who of course wanted to get into ovarian, who realized that this was a more disciplined approach, so that when we got into ovarian, which by the way, we're starting to assess again now, a couple of years later, but we're armed with different information and we have a different approach than we would have had 2 years ago. And we're comfortable that we actually can make a difference this time. So it's that kind of collaboration and discussion with the team, like let's prioritize as a team with commercial, regulatory, and operating considerations to get us to what the first step should be. And again, it worked really well for us in this instance. It's not guaranteed to work like that, but I think that that's a way to really guide the discussion without it making about me versus you.
Right. And so would you say that, allowing the team to think more broadly about a problem and how you're going to approach it, and then narrow down once you have enough data to really determine what the best path forward is? Is that kind of your thinking and how you look at that?
Yeah, it's difficult because it requires patience, and it takes a
Right.
little it takes a little time, and it takes a little extra money to go through all that. You've got to pay the KOLs. I mean, but when you go and you talk to an investor about that's the process you pursued to come to the most interesting conclusion on what your proof of concept should be. I mean, that goes a long way. I mean, it's a disciplined way to approach it. So, again, that's an example of how to integrate the teams to maybe move the goal line a little bit.
When you said patience, you mentioned it, but I automatically thought of money, right? Like patience requires
Yes.
investment. What is it? Just give us a sense. Like, at what stage are you talking to which type of investors? Like, the preclinical investors? Are you educating the kind of the later series investors and just letting them know what you're doing and keeping them interested? And then can you take us a little bit, just give us kind of broad brush maybe of at each stage, like who you're talking to and who invests in that? Obviously, we depend on government funding very early in the research process, but then as we try to commercialize, we depend on private capital for that. So can you help us understand that a little bit?
Yes, for sure. It's a great question and a really important one. So we funded Voltron with high net worth money. So individuals that we talked to about the opportunity here and how the platform could be used in predominantly cancer, although infectious disease is an area that's of great interest to us. But the money so far has really been dedicated to oncology, and many people have unfortunately been touched by the impacts of cancer. So there's a willing audience there. Along the way, once you get going and you have some proof of concept data and you show that you can, maybe scale what you're doing or what you're doing is reproducible, I think at that point it's good to go talk to the government for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of money and there's a lot of smart people there that are dedicated to helping companies move things along. We've had very good experience, for example, with the DoD, very talented people. Who helped us along on the infectious disease side at Voltron. I think the other thing too is, and this is kind of obvious, but it takes time, is to reach out to the advocacy groups and foundations and whatever the disease state you're working in is. Again, the key is patience. It's working with these people to understand why what you have is different and how it's going to impact their constituents. But along the way, if you can help educate them on what you're up to and why it's different and how it can have an impact, and just keep doing that as new developments occur, you really do start to stand out. So I would say high net worth, and then as that's funding your efforts, absolutely go to the government and some of these foundations. There are family offices that do care about specific disease states because a family member had something go wrong, and they're very receptive to these things too. They're just way harder to find. There's not a sign hanging out for them, but I think those are all good places to go. And again, with this whole team thing and the disciplined approach and having a process on how you get everywhere, that does set you up for discussions with strategics. Those take a long time.
Right.
There's a lot of back and forth, but the more you can have a process like I just explained, how we got to head and neck and cervical as our primary proof of concept after going through 20 different things, that's a great discussion point for a strategic when you get there.
Right.
To that
Which
level.
takes us back earlier in the conversation, talking about the trends and kind of where big pharmaceutical manufacturers are investing in technology like Voltron is developing. Patrick, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Really appreciate it. Excited to hear what happens to Voltron next. We'll certainly keep you on our radar, and best of luck to you. The next guest on Money Matters TV will be Edward Paulson, the CEO of Paulson Software Company. As a reminder, you can download the podcast from iTunes and Stitcher, as well as see programs on our YouTube channel, money-matterstv.com. Thank you for joining us for the series, Business of Translational Science. Thank you.